MEP Jill Evans from Wales. She's a member of Plaid Cymru and a member of the Greens EFA group in the European Parliament, who has worked a lot on language equality, and we are very happy that she accepted our invitation to talk to us about the situation of languages such as ours, such as Welsh, such as Gaelic, languages which we wrongly call small, but which are lesser spoken languages, which deserve to have rights as any other languages. Ms. Evans.
Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Bonjour, bore da. Thank you for the invitation to come and speak here and to visit Malta for the first time. I will certainly return in future. And it's very appropriate that this event is in Valletta, the cultural capital, during this European Year of Cultural Heritage, because while language is a tool of communication, it's also intrinsically linked to culture and identity. I have represented Wales, Cymru, in the European Parliament since 1999. Malta narrowly voted to join the EU in 2003, and Wales, together with the rest of the UK, I'm very sorry to say, narrowly voted to leave it in 2016. So the future of the UK's relationship with the EU is more uncertain than ever. But I'm sure you've seen all of the chaos that has ensued in recent months. I hope we will remain in the EU because both our small nations have a huge role to play in building the future of Europe. When Malta joined in 2004, your language became an official language of the EU. My language, Welsh, is not an official language. So despite the fact that about the same number of people in Wales speak Welsh as Maltese in Malta, about 500,000, just over 500,000, I'm not able to use my language in the European Parliament. 40 million people speak languages other than the EU official languages in Europe. But the Welsh language is very important to my identity, and just as important to Wales as a nation. There's a proverb in Welsh, cenedl heb iaith, cenedl heb galon. A nation without a language is a nation without a heart. I have campaigned over the years for equality for all of Europe's languages, because just as language is at the heart of a nation, linguistic diversity is at the heart of the EU. A key element of European identity would be lost if we lose the rich tapestry of languages, including those lesser used languages like Maltese, Irish, and Welsh. We live in an ever increasingly digital age. This presents problems for lesser spoken languages, but it is a huge opportunity as well, and we must turn this to our advantage. We heard earlier about research from Metanet, the network of language technology research centres. This has shown that as many as 21 European languages are at risk of digital extinction. And this is not just unofficial languages. It's also many official languages, minority languages in their own member states, but which can become endangered minority languages in the digital world. So it's an issue for all of us across Europe. The digital world is no longer distinct from the real world. The internet has an impact on every aspect of our lives. And we need to give legal protection to the 60 regional and minority languages that exist in Europe. And we need studies to look at them to show the digital health of all those languages and which minimum standards we should set. A European Commission survey in 2011 showed that in 23 of the then 27 member states, it was before Croatia joined, at least half of internet users used a language other than their own to read and watch content on the internet. This proportion ranged from 50% in Hungary to over 90% in Greece, Slovenia, Luxembourg, Malta and Cyprus. In Italy, the Czech Republic, Ireland and the UK, a majority of internet users said they only used their own languages on the internet. Malta had the highest percentage of people that used a language other than their own all the time. 24% said that they used it frequently. Now, we all know that we now have virtual assistants such as Apple's Siri, Google Assistant, Amazon, Alexa. They're in our lives. But if people are unable to access those services in their own languages, they will naturally opt for one of the big languages that dominate the internet, and as we've heard, that's mostly English. When children grow up in a digital world which is unavailable in their own language, in which their own language doesn't even exist very often, we could see accelerated language shifts in the real world. So how can we reverse this trend? Well, I believe that the European Union can be a world leader in this. I believe that policies can be developed to address the problem and to seize the huge opportunities for research and development. Why shouldn't there be European companies to rival Google and Microsoft? We can do it as well. So I was delighted in September when the European Parliament overwhelmingly supported my report on language equality in the digital age in the plenary session, because this is about language equality. And I'd like to take the opportunity to thank the Commission, the European Commission, for their enthusiastic support for my report and for its recommendations. I spoke at a conference organised by the Commission in Brussels 2 weeks ago, also part of the Translate in Europe activities, where the Director General of DG Translation and representatives of DG Education, Youth, Sport and Culture and DG Communications, Networks, Content and Technology all took part. And there was a clear commitment to language diversity. Both the Parliament and the Commission are committed to ensuring that the next funding programmes through Horizon 2020, the Connecting Europe facility and other instruments will fund projects improving machine translation, terminology processing and other automated language processing facilities. But leadership is crucial. And that's why another of the recommendations in my report is that multilingualism and language technology be assigned clearly to the portfolio of one commissioner. That would reflect the EU's commitment on this very important issue, but it would also task an individual commissioner with implementing the strategy. Parliament has called on the Commission to bring forward a flagship long-term funding programme for research, development and innovation in language technologies, with the clear aim of closing the technology gap between European languages. There is groundbreaking work going on already, and we've heard a lot about that this morning. And one example from Wales is the Language Technologies Unit at Bangor University's Centre for Welsh Language Services, Research and Technology. They are developing a programme that will record the voices of people who are in danger of losing their speech, their ability to speak, because of throat cancer or other health issues, and producing a synthetic, naturally sounding version of that person's own voice. Until now, this service has only been available in English. So for the first time, this will allow people to continue to speak Welsh using their own voice. These developments really change people's lives. There's excellent work being done all over Europe in this field. And to support this work, as well as financial investment, there needs to be coordination between research, industry, governments, and civil society. It's only through sharing the resources and ideas that Europe's language diversity can be maintained in the digital age. So we need a platform to bring this expertise and knowledge together. The Welsh Government last month announced an action plan for Welsh language technology, linked directly to the aim of increasing the number of Welsh speakers to 1 million by 2050. It identifies 3 specific areas of technology to be addressed: Welsh language speech technology, computer-assisted translation, and conversational artificial intelligence. To implement this, there must be collaboration and partnerships, and that includes European partnerships, regardless of where Wales will find itself after March next year. Whether in or out of the EU, we will still be in Europe, and we still want to work on those partnerships. We've heard examples of what other governments have done. We've heard about the Irish government's policy, its plan for a digital strategy from Theresa. The Latvian government has an affirmative information access policy, which in the case of language involves making automated translation services available for all citizens. We must bring all these together and share ideas and resources. And we also heard reference earlier to an excellent example of this, which is the European Language Resource Infrastructure, r-RE, which is co-funded by the EU under the Connecting Europe facility. It helps collect, prepare, and share language resources that can in turn improve translation services. In DG translation in services in DG translation from 4 countries, Ireland, Portugal, France, and Spain. It'll improve the EU automated translation services that are freely available to all public institutions. This is what we need to achieve if we are to get language equality. Some of the recommendations in my report are very timely because the European elections take place in May next year. We'll be electing a new parliament, so we have candidates who we can influence and we can make demands of. A new commission will be appointed next year. We must ensure that they remain committed to our goals, and that's up to us. We have to ensure that. And we have to remember, too, that the member states are equally responsible for playing their part in this strategy. This is a huge opportunity for the EU to become a world leader in language technologies, in terms of industry as well as in terms of equality. It's an opportunity that we can't afford to miss. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you very much.
Many thanks to Ms. Evans. I now invite the Honourable Francis Amid-Demek, who was also a part of the committee that finally endorsed the Language Equality Report by Jill Evans.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Jill. Good afternoon, Everest, colleagues, friends. It certainly gives me a great pleasure to be present for an event of this nature. And if I can, even before proceeding to any prepared text, make a couple of comments with regard to what my colleague shared with us. One of the greatest moments of satisfaction within the European Parliament, which we experience as Maltese members of that institution, is precisely the ability to stand up and speak our own Maltese language, especially when it comes, of course, to the plenary sessions. And that has a great advantage because you are using your own language, but also all that a language stands for, and doing it from the heart, doing it using the idioms you are most familiar with, and also to be able to listen to colleagues, especially colleagues who would be speaking in a language which we would not know or know enough to follow simultaneous interpretation in the Maltese language. And I believe that when the government of Malta was negotiating way back 2003, leading to membership 2004, our accession to the European Union, that was one of the more important elements to emphasize, because it also relates to our very identity. Of course, I cannot not make a comment about Brexit. It's a decision which will ultimately always pertain to the people of the United Kingdom. I can only augur on a personal level that there would be another opportunity, but that would of course require the political will in the United Kingdom to consider seriously the holding of a second referendum. In any case, I am sure that the relations between Malta and the United Kingdom will always be of a very special and close nature. But it will be a great loss to have the United Kingdom move out on the 29th March. When we talk about the Maltese language online and digital media, this is definitely an area that presents to us a major challenge. And this is the first time that we are addressing this issue in the context of the digital transformations that we are facing. And your presence here today, I think, is very encouraging because it proves a commitment across the board towards our language, but also towards facing the challenges that are resulting in respect of our language and other languages precisely because of the digital era and the fact that we need to make sure that we are as present there as in the traditional formats. As has been correctly emphasized in the report that Jill worked upon and had massive support for, and yes, it's a great also privilege and honor for me to have been part of the committee following that report, and of course certainly endorsing it even in the vote we had in the European Parliament. And let us hope that there will be the required follow-up by the Commission, and the required follow-up, as we've heard, not only within the remit of the present mandate of Parliament, but also in the future. I'd like to emphasize here that linguistic diversity, to be correct, has always been at the heart of the European project. From east to the west, from north to south, our languages have been an integral part of creating a Europe with culture. I'm one of those who endorse the notion that had the European Union to be recreated, maybe we should kick off from culture even before the monetary and fiscal aspects and the financial aspects. But that is important because when we relate to language, we are also relating to our history and we are relating to our traditions. And therefore, languages are a very, very precious component of what any country stands for. They are, and they represent the most direct expression of people's own cultural identities, thoughts, values. And that is what the European Union should be all about. When we talk about unity and diversity, it should also be unity in the diversity of the languages. We all have come together to work for peace and prosperity, but equally we need to work and respect the continent's many different cultures, rich traditions, and languages. Since the creation of the European Union with the Coal and Steel Treaty in 1957, up to date, the European Union has currently 24 official languages, and that says quite a bit with regard to our commitment to protect and promote cultural diversity. Because every language is different, and every language has a character of its own. On a deeper level, language is an expression of who we are as individuals, communities, and nations. Maltese, of course, itself is a fascinating and unique language. And we have adapted it, to a large extent preserved it, over the centuries. And it has certainly had a great role even with regard to the unification of our own people, because it is the common thread that is one of the bases of our unity as a whole people. Certainly, it is a crucial part of our national identity, and that is why we need to stand up for it. I also believe it is important to facilitate the teaching and learning of the Maltese language, which we use in our daily lives, as well as in the context of information and communications technology. We live in a world where technology has become an indivisible part of our daily lives, and I won't go into predictions about robots winning over our lives and dictating to us what we need to do or helping us with searches. We've heard a reference to this already in the former speech. I would certainly love to have characters like Siri and Alexa speaking to me in the Maltese language and suggesting what I would need to know about in the Maltese language. And that option should be available, as it should be available in other languages. Because technology is changing the way we live, the way we do business. It's changing the world entirely. But we need, in that context, to ensure that this is not happening at the expense of languages. In Malta, when we read reports about young people who are no longer able to speak and write in Maltese, or for that matter in English, it is certainly of great concern. A recent report, even with regard to exams regarding history, point out this issue again. We need further learning skills because we need to be able to speak and write our language. And I assure you it is very concerning for me, as I'm sure it is for others who are like-minded, when you receive drafts, be it in English or in Maltese, that are, to put it mildly, rather different from what I would expect to have in that draft, especially when it comes to orthography, let alone syntax, let alone method of expression. So we really need to be very conscious of the matter and do whatever it takes. It is only through continuous efforts of teaching the language to younger generations, I think in some instances even to generations that are not that young, that we will be able to keep our language alive and transmit it to generations to come. Because it is crucial for building human connections, which need to be built online as much as we build them offline. A recent report about the Maltese language with regard to what extent it is used by internet users to browse, read, and communicate indicates that only 6.5% of Maltese internet users choose the Maltese language to do that. And that leads me to refer to a major issue that is also referred to, of course, in the report we have referred to, and that we need to be really concerned about. And I am referring to the risk known as the risk of digital extinction. It doesn't affect only the Maltese language, but we are at risk. And this is where our commitment needs to be stronger than ever. With the advances in technology, the inclusion of Maltese language keyboard, had it to be available for Android and iPhone users, for instance, would enable us to communicate better in Maltese. But try searching for the Maltese keyboard on an iPhone. You'll find Maori, you'll find Marathi. If you go to the letter M, you won't find Maltese. We have Maltese on Microsoft, at least. But we need to address this gap, because this is a very, very crucial gap. And it can have a major impact. And it certainly doesn't help us write or spell Maltese correctly, does it? Because if you don't have the keyboard, you're even that further away from having a proper spell checker. Google search in Malta does offer a degree of spelling correction, not necessarily always the best to rely upon, but at least the matter is being addressed. I understand you have also discussed earlier machine tools for translation that are being used by the European institutions. And from talking with a number of persons present, we need to even raise more awareness about the availability of such tools and make those tools more widespreadly available. So yes, there have been a number of positive steps taken, but unless we are vigilant, unless we also lobby strongly with the big corporations like Apple, and we have to do that, be it at the parliamentary level, be it at the council level, so it's not a question of parliamentarians or governments or commissioners. We need to do it at all the levels. We need to do it at all the levels to emphasize that we are talking about our identity. And identity is ultimately about, well, there's a lot of philosophical discussion about this, but let me use one of the expressions which at least would be dear to me, our inner selves, what we stand for, what we represent within our own community. And nothing can be much more important than that. On my part, I have been also actively engaged to include Malta in the YouTube partnership program. Now that has a commercial element, what we would call the monetization element, to ensure that the Maltese creators would get a degree of financial reward for what they put online, just as our Italian, British, French, German counterparts would do. And I do not think that in a digital age it is an argument to state that you come from too small a country, because if the threshold is a question of how many clicks you generate, how many likes you generate, or how much it is shared, but that should be independent of the size of the country, because that could be objectively set, and when you reach that target, then you would qualify. Now, we've achieved so far joining the partnership program and having a separate Malta domain. So that's a step forward. But even then, we need to go further, even with YouTube, to promote the Maltese language. In the long term, we need to work further together. We also need to provide more support to learners, to teachers, to school administrators, to families, to other stakeholders. I can certainly think of authors, publishers, people in other elements of the creative industries, people linked, for instance, to the world of drama, the world of film, video, audiovisual means, to address all these and offer them all the assistance that they require, be it in language content, grammatical knowledge, lexical knowledge, at schools and beyond schools. And this is why I have sought to give further examples. The National Council for the Maltese Language does play, and can certainly continue to play, a crucial and leading role. More guidance is required to promote the use of Maltese language online. We need to attract more web users in Maltese. It's becoming too fashionable for people setting up a new web page to just do it in the English language. We need to understand the benefit of at least having it bilingual and doing an outreach to people who would prefer to follow our information in Maltese. That could potentially include Maltese communities a few thousand kilometers away from us. And yes, why not? There is a much benefit in using English as a communication tool, especially when we use it properly. But not one at the expense of the other. We need both. And having both languages, incidentally, as our official languages, is a major advantage for Malta that is not to be underestimated. So I end by calling upon you, people present who need much conversion. You are the persons here who already believe that the Maltese language needs to be preserved. You are already the people here who know and believe that we need further support in the various areas that I have indicated. And therefore, we hope and need to rely more than ever on the power of our language to bring us together. And thank you, persons present, for making that possible.
Thank you to the Honourable Zamit Demek. Our last speaker is the Minister for Education and Employment, who has many times shown an interest in language and who also spoke about the It-tielet report, which we had referred to earlier, and the threat of digital extinction. And he was one of the main inspirations of the subject, as I had read an article of his about this report, and this started generating the idea for this Translating Europe workshop. So, Minister Bartolo, thank you very much.
Thank you for this initiative. Thank you, Francis. I endorse every word you said. I am but a weak voice in the political wilderness talking about this, and I ask Francis, please educate your colleagues. I will try to do the same on my part. Because one of the biggest problems that we face is that there is low or no awareness of this issue. Obviously, present company accept it. And this is the biggest problem that I find. Please, I'm not saying this, you know, those who study animal behavior say that when a doe, a small deer, meets a tiger, the best way to protect itself is to do this to the tiger so that the tiger will have mercy on the deer to let it survive. I'm not doing this as part of my survival strategy. It is an issue. It is an issue also at the Commission level and at the Council level. I was talking to some colleagues here. In 5 years of Council meetings in Brussels and in other capitals, I think this issue has been brought up only once. I think the new commission that had been set up by Juncker, not giving multilingualism a proper voice in the commission, has downgraded a bit the importance of this topic on the agenda. It is part of the education commissioner, but I don't think it's enough. We need to do more. So I think the biggest problem here, as I said, is we need to raise awareness. I need to do it more on my part. I've been trying to get more resources for this area and for this issue, and so far I have not managed. Galbraith says that one little step to start solving a problem is to admit that it is a problem. And we have a problem here, and we need to create awareness among the political class that this is an important issue. This is an important issue, and we need to raise it on our agenda, because it is not on our agenda. What I understand that Michael was saying before I came, that we miss a basic thing. A national anchor person for all this has to be addressed. Even when I was invited to come here, I said, is this my remit? Should I be the person invited? Because it's shared responsibility among ministries, and I'm sure that even with his ministerial experience, Franz would say that this is deadly. When an issue is shared by different ministries, it becomes an orphan. It's nobody's, instead of having people working together. So for us, there isn't even the consolation of that short story, you know, about there was an important job to be done, and everybody said somebody should do it, but nobody gets it done. In our case, we even have to say that there is a job to be done. So we need to work on that. And what I can promise is that I will follow it up. I will follow it up with different ministries. I see it that there's a bit of a tragic split between those sort of in charge of the digitalization strategy, being split from what needs to be done in this area. So it is if it's not their concern. I'm even shocked that sometimes even people at university and the ICT faculty would say, are we sure that students who come to the ICT faculty need Maltese to join the course? I mean, so that is why I say we need to create awareness across the board, a point that Francis made, and I endorse completely. So my promise and pledge here is to follow up on the recommendations that come out of this seminar and work with other ministers, with other entities, to get the resources necessary do this. And I also look forward to reading your digital strategy for Irish to see what we can do on our part. But before we start saying, let's write another document about what needs to be done. There is work to be done to create awareness and then to mobilize the necessary resources to address this issue. But I really thank you heartily for creating this initiative. Now let's follow up concretely. Thank you very much.
Many thanks to all the participants. Many thanks even for the punctuality. We are 5 minutes ahead. There might be some questions, there might be some comments, but there might be also hunger. So if you are hungry, you can join us for lunch offered by the European Commission, and our catering is core green. Any questions or comments before lunch? Teresa.
In that, what we found from our Welsh colleagues when we investigated why Microsoft supported them in big translation but not Irish. And we were told it was actually linked to the size of Wikipedia. And so there was a concerted effort to increase the Welsh Wikipedia, which showed that there is demand for digital content in language, and therefore the likes of Google and Microsoft will take your language here. And that's what encouraged us now to make a drive to increase our Irish content online so that we can go back to Microsoft, go back to Google and Apple and say, there are people using our language online, here's the benefits of it. And so that helps them with the lobbying to get that. But we've learned that so much.
But that was probably precisely the reason why Mark opened the Wikipedia talk as the opening talk. I think it's evident that it's about visibility, and where to establish visibility, as our politician friends have shown, is not necessarily through politics, but through use.
I'm Khalid Shukri. I'm one of the coordinators of this European Language Resource Coordination. And I just want to share with you a very quick anecdote. We are mentioning the involvement of the big players in this area. We organized a conference since 20 years. I think 2010 it was here in Malta, probably one of the nice events I remember. The first one in Granada, we had some of these big players, and we had a very nice panel. And one of the representatives of these big players started listing some of the languages, about 20 languages. Then he drew a line around the 10. And he said, well, these languages, we are taking care of them. Basically, he meant they are regretted enough for us to be interested. The rest, and he was talking to the research community and to some other industries, the rest is yours. Which means that if you don't take care of your languages, we as commercial-oriented organizations, we will only do it if it's market-driven. Otherwise, it's really used. And this is what we hear in going around Europe. Not only, I hate this minority, because I guess in Ireland, Irish is not really a minority language, it's spoken by a large number of Irish, and this is the same in Scotland, Wales, and so on, and others. If people don't take care of their language, this digital extension will happen, and we will just look at it and assume that even if the British decide to leave, English will remain the lingua franca till the next rise of the battle. So I think it's really a big issue, and it's in your hands. The research community is really willing to support that, and we're doing our best. Some of us come to Malta very regularly because we really want to see Maltese, like many other languages, develop and used in the digital world. So we have our support, and we appreciate this.
If I may ask, in particular the European Commission members here and Honourable Francis are there any specific funds at European level to preserve minority languages? I mean, there's a lot of money for, preserving endangered species and whatever. What about preserving languages, especially where folkloristic medicine, which might still be relevant even this day and date, is concerned?
Someone would like to answer the question about funding on a European level, maybe?
Well, the report we just adopted about diversity of languages, in fact, also appeals for further funds. There are funds, we need to be more aware of them and to use them. So, and the plan is to have more funds, particularly to protect minority languages. Because again, it ties in with the whole concept of unity in diversity. Maybe we should add here, unity in diversity of languages, just to link directly with today's theme. But I don't know if Jill wants to add a comment on that.
Sorry, just briefly, in my report it calls for specific legal protection for all the languages across Europe, because while we've seen a lot of support for diversity, I don't think there's been a strong enough commitment by the Commission to minority languages. We fought for a long time to get Welsh recognised as an official language, for example. We have a kind of semi-official status now, co-official status, which doesn't really meet the needs of what we want. And I do believe that in terms of Europe's future and the debate that is now ongoing, particularly in light of Brexit, that the EU must address the problem of not speaking to people in their own languages, because all languages should be equal, and they certainly are not at the moment. So that's why we are looking for a much stronger, specific commitment to minority languages. That includes funding, of course, but it's also a political commitment.
So, kind of carrying on from what I said about there not being enough source material, but also a chicken and egg situation where there isn't enough usage, one way to counteract this would be, at least for us, the Maltese, is to pressure government into providing more of their services and more of their websites in both languages, as is a legal right, which would trickle down, because if you build it, they will come. So there will be usage. So I know many people in the legal profession, for example, they will always favor using the Maltese language of the body of laws over the English, because they know that that is what they will end up operating in. So if all other services, as is the law, are provided to us in both languages, that will have a trickle-down effect, as much as I hate that phrase, but it will have a trickle-down effect, and there will be a lot more material that can then be used to help with machine translation as well. So that's an area where we as the people can put pressure on our representatives.
Yes, I think to be fair, referring to Europe, I think Europe is already doing a very, very big, it's really doing more than its fair share in providing content in Maltese. I think what's really lacking here, and this really ties in with what Mark is saying, we need to get our own house in order, because we cannot expect and be lobbying Europe to translate all their, all the different DG websites into various languages when our own public authorities only have websites in English. And this really weakens our argument, especially with Europe, which is already doing more than its fair share. So I really believe, that what we really lack here is Malta has never had a bilingual policy. So I think that should be the starting point. We need a bilingual policy which preserves both Maltese but also English, because I think there's also a worrying trend in terms of the level of English in Malta.
Intervention that generated some interest.
Yes, sorry for talking again, but I just wanted to first of all, I'd really like to thank you for setting this up, because I actually found this very useful, and I met a number of people whose work I did not know, and I'm mentioning that because that's an important issue, because I think in Malta there's something that's very positive and that needs to be said, which is at this point there is a significant critical mass of expertise where people working in language technology are concerned. There's the university campus, which is my sort of playground, and I know what's going on there. And there's a lot of people, a significant number of people actually, who work in natural language processing and language technology in one way or another. And there's also a lot of individuals, companies, groups working off that campus. So it's not just the campus, right? And that's something that needs to be celebrated because a decade ago that was not the case, right? And actually, when I moved back to Malta, I had high hopes, and they've come true in a sense because Mike Rosner was around, and he was sort of catalyzing and making this happen, and it has happened, right? What we lack, though, is a national rallying point, and this is why this discussion of national anchor points and curation of resources is so crucial, because without that, right, a lot of the projects that we have, a lot of the things that we do, the resources, the tools that we create, etc., right, will fizzle out or simply not be maintained because people move on. And it's, you know, speaking from an academic perspective, right, a lot of what we do is unfortunately time limited because we work with limited funding, we have projects, they come to an end, and then, you know, your parser, which you created, is no longer going to be maintained because you don't have the resources to maintain it, right? Our corpora, lexicons, etc., have been maintained virtually with no funds once the main funds ran out because, you know, they had to be maintained. We had a lot of people using them, literally thousands. But unless we have a national curation strategy for these things, right, we're going to allow them to fizzle out, especially if and when the people who are currently maintaining these things, and there are many, right, decide that it's time to move on. Somebody should be there to keep these things together and to make them available to people. This is really crucial. This is what we lack.
One last comment. We have a question and a comment.
I wish to have listened to the whole presentation, but I was busy outside. But maybe related, we're speaking about machine translation. What about speech-to-text of Maltese? Because you will find online many apps and applications for speech-to-text. I happen to work a lot with hearing-impaired people, and it's always a problem when you have people who are not English-speaking or who don't speak other languages, and you wish to give them a speech-to-text facility.
Thank you very much. We'll have the last question or comment.
This speech-to-text thing and vice versa has already been raised by one of the speakers. I would like to say, I mean, I follow these conferences, and I keep mentioning certain practical things. And I go back to the need to use funds that already exist. In the field of subtitling for films, there is the Lux Prize, which is available in practically every EU language. Why were we kept out of it? Now, we have the people, trained people, for subtitling. Why are we not using them? Subtitling in Maltese is a right. Our people have a right to it. Why are we not giving them that right? Thank you.
Thank you very much to all, and we can continue these discussions over lunch. Thank you for attending.